We'll also talk very briefly about what are called reproductive isolating mechanisms. These are a collection of evolutionary mechanisms like behaviors or physiological processes which are critical for speciation. They prevent members of different species from producing offspring, or they ensure that any hybrids that are formed are sterile. These processes help to maintain the integrity of a species by reducing the flow of genes between species that are related. They're usually categorized as either prezygotic, before the formation of the zygote, or postzygotic, after the formation of the zygote. The prezygotic isolating mechanisms prevent related species from ever forming zygotes. Here's some examples. Habitat isolation. Good example of this are lions and tigers. They are closely related. They don't typically form zygotes, though, because they're living in very different parts of the world. They don't come into contact with each other in nature. Another example is behavioral isolation. Most animals have some type of mating dance or mating ritual, mating behavior. And organisms from different species may have different mating dances or different mating behaviors. So they're not attracted to each other. Their mating behaviors don't allow them to ever come together to try the physical act of mating. There also can be temporal or time isolation. Related species may have different breeding seasons, or like in flowers or plants, they may have different flowering times. So they can't reproduce because their mating seasons are different. There's also mechanical isolation. This just essentially means that the reproductive parts of these two species no longer fit together and work together correctly. And lastly, there's gametic isolation. This means that even though the two species may be attracted to each other, they may go through the physical act of sex, but when the sperm and eggs get together, that they can't form a zygote. They don't recognize each other and can't form a zygote. So these prezygotic isolating mechanisms prevent related species from forming viable zygotes. And then there's also postzygotic isolating mechanisms. These are mechanisms which act after fertilization, but they prevent successful interpopulation or interspecies production of viable offspring. Maybe the most famous one of these is reduced hybrid viability. So even though these two species can mate, they can form a zygote, they can form an offspring, it just lacks the ability to live. It has reduced survival ability. There's also reduced hybrid fertility. This would be the mule would be a good example of this. Horses and donkeys, different species, but they can mate. But their babies, the mule, is sterile. So a mule itself is not really a species because it can't reproduce itself.